from the campus of Belmont University. News Channel 5, the Tennessean, and the League of Women Voters present the Nashville Mayoral Debate. Now, here are your moderators, Rory Johnston and David Plazas.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the campus of beautiful Belmont University here in Nashville. I'm News Channel 5's Rory Johnston.
And I'm David Plazas from the Tennessean. Thank you for joining us tonight for our fourth and final in the Nashville Mayoral Debate series.
Of course, we started this race with more than a dozen candidates. Now we are down to two. Starting tomorrow, voters will begin their choosing of Nashville's next mayor, and over the next hour, we will hear from these two candidates and their visions for our city.
So let's introduce our candidates now. First, we have Haslam Administration official Alice Rolli and Metro Council member Freddie O'Connell. Our goal is to cover as much ground as possible tonight, so let's get right to it.
Thank you both for being here. You may applaud if you'd like. Now, thank you. We want to begin with a very important topic, one that's on everyone's mind this week, and that is the safety of our kids at school. The special session appears to have stalled, with the Senate refusing to even consider most bills. Are there specific bills that you would like to see the legislature pass during this special session? Again, each candidate has 90 seconds to answer, and we will begin with Alice.
Great. Well, thank you, and thank you, Belmont, for having us here tonight. School is back in session, and both of my children are elementary school age, and I am concerned for our city today that we have returned $5.25 million back to the state that was allocated to put school resource officers at every one of our county's elementary schools. I think we've got to name that, and we've got to make sure that our kids across the county are protected. In terms of the special session, I am, like many families, saddened that we didn't see more legislation come up. I am very supportive of making sure that we do everything we can to help people store their guns safely. I liked seeing more support there, both for funding and for access to safe storage. I also am very supportive of the additional mental health and school resource officer funding that came through. But like a lot of responsible gun owners, I am dismayed that we cannot yet find a way, if we're able to separate a child from their parent, when that parent is drug addicted or mentally ill, I believe that we should be able to find a reasonable way to temporarily separate an individual from their firearms if they are experiencing mental health or drug addiction of that level. So I'd love to see that in the future, and I think that if we are able to separate a child from their parents, we can be smart and figure out a way to do that temporarily with a firearm.
Thank you. Freddie O'Connell.
Rory, thanks. This special session is only occurring because of the extraordinary tragedy that affected us all on March 27th, but especially affected the families at the Covenant School. And that is why this entire session should be focused on gun safety. For specific legislation, I'm in agreement. I think the overall thing that we have seen since we've stepped away from national best practices that states have available to them in gun violence, allowing permitless carry, open carry, and no storage requirements in vehicles. The allowances we've offered have meant that one of Nashville's worst epidemics is guns stolen from vehicles. And a gun stolen from a vehicle is very unlikely to be put toward lawful purposes later. The storage of guns and vehicles bill should pass. That's one of the things that I think is most important. Beyond that, I do think a risk protection order bill would be top of mind. It's something that, as mayor, I will continue working with the families that are a part of the Voices for a Safer Tennessee Coalition, the Covenant families, all of whom are calling for this, and I'd like the General Assembly, frankly, to do more to honor the victims of that tragic school shooting. Gun safety, there are steps we can take at a local level that I'll be pursuing starting when I'm mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question continues public safety. One of the House bills specifically targets the city of Nashville Metro schools recently refused state grant money to put a school resource officer in every school. Metro Police say they simply don't have enough officers to do it, and school officials were worried about an increased police presence. In the wake of the Covenant school shooting, do you think we need an officer in every school, and should the state be allowed to override Metro's decision? Freddie O'Connell.
Thanks, David. I think generally speaking, we've done very well as an economy, we've done very well as a city, and we've governed ourselves for 60 years as a metropolitan government without a lot of state overreach. And I think from my standpoint, I'd be inclined to listen to our leaders in the police department, to our leaders in the Metro school system, and to our school leaders right on the ground. We have also daughters in our public schools and elementary and middle schools right now. And we know from multiple lockdown scenarios that they have been generally safe. We know that our school leaders are doing the right things to inform our school communities. We know they're working closely with law enforcement and other safety professionals on training. I think if we're looking at staffing models within Metro Police for 8 years, we've generally been looking at increases in personnel, improvements in equipment, improvements in facilities. We've invested steadily, and I've been there for all of those investments, whether it was body armor fleet improvements, pay increases for new recruits. And that's the hard part. I think for me, knowing that there is a partnership between schools and police, I have a lot of confidence in our school leaders and having that conversation even at the school level, much less the city level. I'd rather the state not interfere and allow Dr. Battle and Chief Drake to continue to have the appropriate conversations to figure out what resources are necessary. We're opening a new police precinct in Antioch. We know we've got an entertainment district initiative in downtown. I want to make sure those are fully staffed.
Thank you very much. Alice Rolli?
Yeah, this is an area where I think the councilman and I diverge quite a bit. In 2017, both houses and near unanimously passed what is called the Teachers' Bill of Rights. Our teachers have the right to be safe in the schools that they are working in. And that means that if our school buildings should be as safe as any other government building here. That means that we should have an armed and uniformed member of our police there on site. These are our most vulnerable children and our teachers, and we are struggling to retain our teachers, and if we are not keeping their safety at the forefront too, we've seen in many of these tragedies that when there is a police presence, evil is deterred. And so I think it is unconscionable that we will not put out a help wanted sign to say, will you come here? Will you come through our police academy? Will you come and protect our children? Will you be part of what I believe can be the best urban police force in America, and let us have the safest schools, and let our teachers also feel safe going to work?
Thank you.
That bill is just one example of Metro's deteriorating relationship with the state. We know former Mayor Bill Purcell says repairing the relationship with state lawmakers, in his opinion, should be the next mayor's top priority. Tell us why you're the best person to do that and how you intend to go about it, and we'll begin with Alice Rolli.
Great, thank you. This is one of the primary reasons I joined the race for mayor. Watching the city that I love, the city that has always been home to me and my family, absent the time that we were gone for my husband's military service. This is the city that we came back to. This is the city where my 2 boys were born. This is a city that I want to succeed. The highest point in the county is named Gainier Ridge at Radnor Lake. That's named for my great-grandfather, and it is a reminder of a time period when we worked productively with the state. Securing generational investments for Nashvillians can happen when we take the ego out of it. That is not a city park, it's a state park. And to step back and say, how do we work productively with the state to advocate for the dollars that we need here for roads, for schools, for transit, and for serving our most vulnerable populations. Issues like homelessness, issues like transit, these are not things that stop at the county line, and these are things that our neighbors want Nashville to succeed. So let's take the ego out of it. Let's remove this concept of us and them and start to work together productively to get results for Nashvillians.
Freddie O'Connell.
So I think what we've seen, and this is, again, it's important to understand these contrasts. If you listen carefully to the last answer, Alice is clearly willing to work with state overrides. While many of us on the local level were working this year to defend Nashville's interests, whether it came to the convention center and causing it to potentially go out of business, which is one former convention center authority board member mentioned in a bill targeting that, or the airport authority, or in this conversation in the mayor's race, where Alice suggested she'd look to take over the school board and dismantle our elected school board. This is inviting further state overreach. This is not about defending Nashville's interests, and I think the next mayor is going to have to do two things well. We are going to have to recalibrate the state relationship, but we're going to do that with regional partners like the city and county mayors I've already worked with for a long time as a Nashville MTA board member through the Mayor's Caucus. We're going to have to work with other big city mayors. We're going to have to express a collection of shared priorities together and not invite further state overreach. We're going to have to defend Nashville's interests while looking for those appropriate places of partnership. That's exactly the approach I've been taking. I've been building state relationships for a long time. I come to the table with a bipartisan mix of support for this campaign, and I will go to the table that we sit around together to forge partnerships for the city as a Nashvillian, and remembering that we are all Tennesseans. That's one of the most important things that we have to do for ourselves. We represent 10% of Tennesseans, and we need to earn our opportunities to have appropriate levels of local authority.
Yep. We are allowing the candidates a little extra time to follow up, and you would like to follow up. We'll give you a few seconds. Go ahead.
I would like to follow up. When we are unproductive at the city level responding to the needs of our citizens here go and petition the state. So fixing the relationship with the state and running the city well has to be job one. Right now, over the last 8 years, we are now doubled how much money we're paying on interest in our debt. And Fran Bush, one of the former mayoral candidates, recently joined my campaign. She was the sole voice on our school board to reopen schools. A state law had to be passed when the needs of parents were being overridden at every turn by bureaucracy committed to not listening to parents. So if our city runs well, the state will manage itself. We have to manage our city well.
Go ahead. Mr. O'Connell. Quiet, please. Quiet, so we can give them enough time. Go ahead.
Rory, this is maybe the most remarkable set of contrasts. Basically, Alice has just said that the appropriate thing for Nashvillians to do is not to use our authority under our existing charter to do things like set our metro council size. It's to go ask the state to override our local elected officials. That's extraordinary to me. I cannot imagine trying to operate a government where we're going to ask the state for things if we're in a vocal minority. The right way to do that is to win elections, to challenge school board members whose positions you don't like. We've got a 40-member Metro Council, and the last time, as recently as 2015, that we asked ourselves if that's the size we wanted, we resoundingly said yes. We have the tools to govern ourselves, and we should be allowed to use them.
Okay. Thank you both. We have to ask you to refrain from applause so that we can give them enough time. Go ahead.
All right,
Thank you.
The next question. Another big concern facing Nashvillians is the skyrocketing cost of living. According to the Alliance for Affordable Nashville, in 2017, 72% of zip codes in Nashville were considered affordable. Just 4 years later, that number had dropped to just 21%, and it is even lower today. Aside from the obvious answer of increasing funding, what will you do as mayor to create more affordable housing in Nashville? Freddie O'Connell.
Great, thanks. I think, David, I'd actually go further than your question and say, how do we retain the affordable housing that exists? One of the most important things I put on the table would be to start coordinating the tools we have. Thanks to Representative Love's leadership at the state level, a great example of a state and local partnership, he increased the income threshold for those 65 and up in Nashville who up to $60,000 a year now can participate in a property tax freeze and relief program. That means rising property values and correspondingly rising property taxes are less likely to keep seniors from being pushed out of their homes. The mayor's office has tremendous power working across multiple metro departments to get the data to identify all of the people who could possibly participate in that program. We have an affordable housing task force report. We're in progress on many of its key recommendations. One of the least used pieces of that report so far has been looking at additional sources of revenue to have creative opportunities to continue to invest. But over the past few years, I on Metro Council and joined by a coalition of colleagues have made sure to invest $30 million a year, a key recommendation of the Barnes Housing Trust Fund. Those dollars typically get leveraged in the private sector 6 times over to bring money in. I will also say transit is affordable housing policy. It's one of the biggest missing pieces we have in our affordability toolkit, our accessibility toolkit, our mobility toolkit. Transit and affordable housing need to be linked together as we tackle cost of living, and we shouldn't miss out on wages. I expect to have an Office of Opportunity that looks at a whole spectrum of wage increases.
Thank you. Alice Rolli?
So the first way we made living in this city less affordable is raising taxes. And so the idea that making the city more affordable means spending more of your money, I think is hard for most Nashvillians to get their minds around. We today, after 8 years of budget decisions, have raised the per capita property taxes by about 70%. Look across what is collected and how many people live here, and do the math. We are collecting a massive amount more from your paycheck, more from other things that you could be spending your money on. So first, not raising taxes. Secondly, making sure that your child can go to a school that you want your child to go to, that is high quality, that your tax dollars are paying for. We see high quality publicly funded schools all over the county. We see many with waiting lists, and we see parents having to opt out when there's not a seat for them. That contributes to an affordability challenge. There is clearly a space for the government to get out of the way if we are holding up permitting. How do we become more customer focused to bring permits, to bring projects online so that we are not contributing to higher costs because of the higher carrying cost? There is also appropriately, through the Barn Fund and through some other avenues, a place for government to be a part of the capital stack so that we can have affordable units as a part of new multifamily developments coming on transit corridors across the county.
Thank you.
All right, we want to turn now to transit. 5 years ago, voters overwhelmingly rejected a nearly $9 billion transit plan that would have brought light rail to Nashville. Since then, we know traffic congestion has only gotten worse. What specifically would you do to address our growing transit problem and keep Nashville, as we know, from becoming the next Atlanta? We begin with Alice Rolli.
Well, I think that the transit question and transportation question is a really important one for voters in this election. As I'm sure that the councilman will relay, he has spent about 7 years on the MTA board, and I think 3 of them as its chairman, architecting a plan that was put to voters to spend $9 billion on trains and tunnels kind of to nowhere. And most of the response then was, if there's not enough money, we'll just come back and ask for more. I think this kind of thinking the citizens rejected soundly. They understand that now coming back in a regional approach, seeing pragmatic and practical pieces like expanded city bus centers across the county that have been opened, expanding bus routes, and then thinking about how we come back in a way that I think uniquely in this race I can do, a way of accountability and advocating for the taxpayer. When we in Davidson County don't have dedicated transit funding, it means that Davidson County taxpayers are at a disadvantage to all other top 25 metros in the country. So we need to secure putting that in front of the voters, probably in November 2026, the opportunity for dedicated transit funding, but with a plan that makes sense, with a plan that says that we know that the goal should be to get those last miles into the downtown core, increased transportation there. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Mr. O'Connell.
As a former Nashville MTA board member, we had a great plan that's still in effect. That's called In Motion. It is not the plan we put in front of voters. That one I actually had to repeatedly ask to even get access to see it back before 2018. And it did have some overinvestments and things we won't need in an ongoing transportation plan. The good news is we have an existing comprehensive transportation plan in our hands right now that offers a pathway to traffic management centers, improved use of technology so that we actually keep traffic flowing and safer than it typically does right now. It includes state of good repair initiatives like infrastructure for roads and bridges and tunnels, some of our funding of which has gone way down in the past few years. And yes, it includes transit and related infrastructure. Meanwhile, WeGo, since I left the board, our transit authority, has continued to advance work plans based on the strategic plan. There is a 3-year plan we hold in hand right now that would do things like get people to and from Nashville SC games when we're trying to win the League's Cup. It is one of the top requests I've had as actually having transit service to the assets that matter most. We've got the capacity to build community transit centers in the parts of the city where we know people are eager to ride or already riding, as transit ridership on core routes has gone up above pre-pandemic levels in multiple cases. If we do this and talk about a strategic plan for the future, we'll be in good shape.
Thank you both.
Along those same lines, much of Nashville's traffic is caused by commuters, people driving into and out of the city every day. How does your transit plan ensure neighboring counties step up and Nashville isn't left footing the bill? Freddie O'Connell.
Dude, thanks. This is going back to both being a former board member of Cumberland Region Tomorrow, which helped cities and counties around Middle Tennessee engage in strong planning exercises and have tools to work on regional growth, not just Nashville's growth and sprawl, as well as a Nashville MTA board member. We partnered closely with our regional transportation authority. Right now, the same transit agency runs things like commuter coaches and the Star, but we have been unable to expand frequencies and hours to make those fit more realistic commuting patterns. It is important to invite our regional partners in, and the next plan we put on the table will have to have regional elements that show us at the county line where those appropriate connections are. But I think that is also why our collection of shared priorities are so important. The state just passed a Transportation Modernization Act. It's got a lot of road improvement scenarios in it. We know that we've got opportunities to use that on state routes and elsewhere to improve potholes and other things that are just state of good repair scenarios. But we know it also contains some multimodal provisions that will let us reduce congestion. We hope it will further state funding and local matches for our traffic management center, which is going to help us improve on the technology we're using again, so that instead of retiming signals manually around the city and thinking we've done a good job, that the signals respond to where traffic is actually flowing, including during special events. The regional piece, working with that mayor's caucus, it's going to be something I reinvest in deeply as mayor.
Thank you very much. Alice Rolli.
We do need to work productively with our neighboring mayors, and traffic and transit will only get worse because Nashville itself, Davidson County itself, is not growing. We are flatlining because of our higher taxes, our higher crime, and our schools that don't have enough seats and high quality options for families. So families are moving out, they're being pushed out, and that is going to continue to contribute to traffic challenges. So how do we address that? Well, first, there has in this most recent state budget about $750 million to our region, but there's also separately a $300 million set aside that counties can apply for individually. So we will continue to invest in grant writers within NDOT to make sure that we are maximizing and getting every dollar here for transit projects to benefit Davidson County. We will secondly work with our neighboring mayors to find common areas to begin to collect cars so that they are not all coming into the county. We all know the cost of parking downtown, that's only going up. There are no longer parking minimums in the downtown. That's a supply and demand issue. That means the last mile, every car we can start to pull off of the road. And then third, we want to think about what are metrics for our largest employers, our hospitals, our performance venues, that we can start together to say, you've got employees and patrons outside of the county. How do we start to work together to come up with some shared goals that part of their transit journey is using public transportation, that we're pulling cars off of Davidson County?
All right, we wanted to switch things up a little bit and, as in the past, allow you to ask a question of each other. So we will do that now. And Alice Rolli, we will begin with you.
Well, great. Well, I will ask the councilman an issue that is really important to me. I was honored recently to receive the endorsement of the Fraternal Order of Police and public safety, the challenges that we are seeing of the increase in violent crimes, worrisome statistics directionally about our city's crime. So help me understand why you did not vote to support a recommended budget item for our police to fund our police in their request to help bolster their force with technology, with license plate readers that were proven to help us solve crimes, proven to help us get prosecutable evidence, and proven to help us support victims of crime.
Sure, it's a great question, Alice, and I think this is worth a community conversation that we never had. In fact, representing parts of the city over the past 8 years where people felt over-surveilled, they brought their concerns to me. And it got worse last summer when Tennessee became a forced birth state with no exceptions, which meant that abortion became a felonized penalty that shows up in national crime databases, the same ones that will be used by this license plate reader technology. This means that if you are driving from one part of the city to another, possibly to get access to health care as a woman, or crossing state lines to get access to abortion services, you might show up on a criminal database at some point. This is hard to imagine for a lot of people. Worse than that, though, we heard from representatives of multiple long-standing representation organizations for people in our brown and black communities in Nashville that said overwhelmingly they were concerned about the ways this technology could be used to target them. When we discovered the locations of the cameras, it turns out they weren't particularly equitably distributed. And if we look at crime rates over the past year, crime has already fallen without the use of license plate readers. While this technology is used elsewhere, I will say as a law-abiding citizen, I prefer not to have a patrol car with a dash cam following my movements around the city. But that is effectively what a broad net of license plate reader technologies are. They aren't cute little pictures of your license plate. They recognize your entire vehicle, and as a software technology professional, when you have a large database of data like that that has got insufficient guardrails around it, later this can create new classes of victims for stalkers, people going through divorce, anything that's access to cancer treatment, mental health. It deserves the kind of consideration that we should have had as a community conversation.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. O'Connell, do you have a question for Ms. Rolli?
Sure. Right here on this stage during one of the debates, you said your biggest idea or innovation was tackling lurking debt. We have just in the past few weeks established our best credit rating as a AA+ city in the first time in Metro's history. And I've just visited Goodlettsville Elementary, the new James Lawson High School. We have a new police precinct coming online in Antioch. We just opened Ravenwood Park. None of these investments would have been possible without either the property tax rate increase that Mayor Cooper initiated or issuing debt. So I'm asking, which one of these would you have cut?
I think the question is around the philosophy of government and of governing, and I do come from a philosophy that has led to our state having the lowest debt per capita of any state in the country. This year's state budget, all 95 counties on a $55 billion budget, our entire debt service is $342 million. The Metro Nashville budget that was just approved on roughly $3.25 billion has $413 million in debt. By kicking the can down the road over the last about 16 years, but really the last 8 years, we have consistently not made decisions to live within our means. We've kicked that can down the road, and that means that today we're spending 40 times servicing our debt as we are on mental health and social services. We are telling our communities to do participatory budgeting, but we're not asking them to participate in raising their taxes or adding each year considerably more spending than what we are taking in. So I think the question is more, who is accountable to the taxpayers? Who is able to operate a business, as I have multiple times, to meet a payroll, to figure out what you have to do, what you need to keep, what you need to stop doing in order to live within the city's means and to not continue to push our longtime homeowners out.
Thank you both. Thank you both. David?
Our next question, thank you. Next question, one of the biggest criticisms of Nashville in recent years has been the focus on downtown development at the expense of neighborhoods. Both of you have said that you'll work to change that. But what specifically will you do to ensure things like sidewalks and street lamps are a priority in every Nashville neighborhood? Are there specific parts of town that you think need extra attention? Freddie O'Connell.
Sure, and David, I'd say as a longtime resident of North Nashville, you can see the further north you go beyond Broadway, the more challenging it has been. One thing that we have done as a Metro Council is ensure that we start seeing maps that show our capital spending plans and where those items are. It's great that we got this geographical distribution of very recent investments, and I think that's the idea, is that we need to continue that. My colleague Sandra Sepulveda in District 30 just reviewed with her community a new park that they've just named Mariposa. It's a great asset for that community. In addition to the Ravenwood Park I just mentioned, Old Hickory is underway with a new community center. I know our Metro schools, after just opening James Lawson and Goodlettsville, the top questions I got when visiting those schools were, when are we going to get to the other schools like Glencliff, like Maplewood? And so we know we've got a capital improvements program that needs to make sure we're going in sequence and having that conversation fully with the entire community. The good news, though, is representing that area, the urban core, where we've seen incredible property tax efficiency out of a very valuable tax base. I've represented the footprint of fully 12% of our property tax revenues. This means that we actually have more capacity to invest in our 500+ square miles. I think it's a real advantage to be able to think about the entire city as we make investments.
Thank you. Alice Rolli.
The downtown is an incredible economic engine for the city, and so first we will make sure that our downtown is safe, it's clean, and it's open for business. We will not do things like say some groups can come and some groups won't. We will be a city that is open for the business of tourism, which is an enormous driver to our county. Secondly, we will look at how we are matching the cost of these additional services in the downtown at their site. We have surplus funding through our Music City Convention Center, and that funding should appropriately be placed in increasing and paying for additional officers, additional security, and additional trash and other ways to keep our downtowns clean and safe. Because if our downtown tourism industry starts to dry up because it starts to not be safe, starts to be overrun with homelessness and crime, we will have a problem paying for the county's services. In terms of making sure we are funding projects regionally around the county, meeting with a number of our county mayors and county commissioners, like the Goodlettsville mayor, like our Forest Hills mayors and City of Oak Hill, and our folks in Berry Hill and Belle Meade, they have asked, could we reintroduce a mayors and a city mayors working group? We used to have that, and I think we used to be more successful when we worked together, listened to their concerns from their residents, and made sure that those were prioritized in our city's approach to supporting the entire county.
Thank you.
Speaking of development, we know the city has pushed two pretty high-profile projects in recent months, the new Titans Stadium, and then there's the plan to bring NASCAR back to the fairgrounds. I want to begin and focus on the stadium. As mayor, how will you support this $2 billion stadium project now that it's been approved by the council? And how do you intend to guide development on the East Bank? Begin with Alice Rolli.
Well, I am glad to see the fruition of the East Bank. After decades of giving city land away, typically to balance the budget or to make ends meet, we have recovered more than 100 acres in our downtown core. What is that going to do for Nashville, for transforming us for the future? Well, first, there is going to be a new Titans Stadium. The bonds have been issued there. And so what does the next mayor need to do? She needs to get really busy working with our state partners, because my experience in economic development shows me and tells me that the way large-scale economic development projects work, like that Titans Stadium, is bringing the state in to pay for appropriately a quarter of the infrastructure to build out that region. They came in for a quarter of the purchase price and the building price of this Titans Stadium. Let's use that logic and bring them in to help there. I believe that we will also see development around our riverfront with some of our most impressive assets, bringing TPAC there, bringing our performing arts and enlivening the river, making sure that our transit spine is working, bringing roads and then the Music City Star so that we can have a strong transit corridor there. I'm excited about the opportunity to continue to recruit and invest in high quality jobs and businesses, and we've got to get busy making sure our kids are ready for those maximum wage jobs so that they can participate in the success of the East Bank.
All right. Freddie O'Connell.
All right, thanks. This is again, a point of contrast as we come down the home stretch. Alice uncritically supported the stadium deal from its outset. I fought with council members to make sure that at least we got a modest return on the public investment that we were making. It was the largest public subsidy for a stadium in the history of sports in America, and I think that's not exactly a great example of fiscal responsibility. Now the deal is done. We did get a return thanks to work directly done by Metro Council. And one of the pieces of the deal that was actually very successful has been the East Bank Vision Plan. This plan puts into effect very clear targets for what we have to do on affordable housing. And I think our measure of success for how the entire East Bank comes together around a new stadium where the Titans intend to play football in 2027 is how have we done on the affordability measures there? Have we ensured that someone working in the stadium could have at least the option of living nearby somewhere in the East Bank? I think beyond that, if you look at the infrastructure plans, we need to make sure that there is connectivity both into East Nashville, where East Nashvillians will tell you game days are a chaotic mess, and into downtown, not avoiding downtown, connecting the fabric so that the neighborhoods we build on the East Bank actually put appropriate pressure on an out-of-control entertainment district that welcome people back in as a family destination. I think ultimately the East Bank Vision Plan should guide our development, and the next mayor will need to be very focused on that and how we invest in citywide initiatives.
You want to follow up? Go ahead.
One thing for our viewers, Alice is not a part of the Metro City Council, and the Metro City Council, 2/3 of them voted in favor of the Titans. I see the role as the 10th mayor of taking the baton for our city and looking forward. The front windshield is twice as large as the back. So that decision has been made. My job is to be the chief revenue officer to get those cash registers going, to get the money here for our schools, and not to spend a lot of time litigating who voted for what. I was not in the city council and I did not vote for or against that.
Okay. Thank you. David.
All right, our next question, turning now to the fairgrounds. Nashville has a long history of racing at the fairgrounds, but the track is old and in desperate need of repair. Mayor Cooper presented a plan to allow Bristol Motor Speedway to take over the racetrack that the council did not take up. Do you support this plan or something of that version? Freddie O'Connell.
David, the plan honestly never even got full consideration, so I didn't give it the level of scrutiny that, for instance, the Titans deal received. There wasn't time for us to get to an up or down vote. I will say, as someone who grew up hearing the sounds of the Speedway from my parents' house in West Nashville, I think the Speedway is actually a great characteristic of our more than a century-old fairgrounds. I think the question going forward is going to be how to honor the Speedway, make responsible investments, and make sure we are addressing as thoroughly as possible community concerns. I will say for my part, while there is excitement in the idea of NASCAR, we know there are a bunch of different types of racing series. We know that there are a bunch of different types of uses you can do on a speedway that involve the community. And I expect to be fully involved in that conversation and make sure that it's something that fits the fairgrounds as a whole. We know we have a soccer-specific stadium there. We know we have an expo facility. We have a charter requirement to have a fair there that I expect will continue as well. I want all of those activities, including the new park space and dog park, as well as the infrastructure and affordable housing that's coming online, all to be able to peacefully coexist. So I wouldn't say I'm committed to the plan that sort of petered out here at the end of the term, but I am absolutely committed to making sure we have a successful conversation about the Speedway.
Thank you. Alice Rolli.
Yeah, I am supportive of the Metro Charter Council, which says that we will have racing at the Speedway. Now, how do we get there, and how do we take a perspective that understands how successful economic development deals are done across the state? Look, right now, I think a lot of the tension is around the size of this additional stadium, being 30,000 seats. And that's a function of the revenue bonding laws that the state has. And so that is dictating in some ways why that stadium is being presented at that size. So if the neighbors at MLS don't want a stadium of that size, I think they've got a lot of terrific folks on their team, and we can go and work together and take out of the playbook what Madison County got over in Jackson. A water park developer got $42 million to bring Great White Water Park there, right? So how do we start to say, how can I bring state dollars to bear to do something that we know longtime Nashvillians are supportive of, our city charter is supportive of? How do we rehabilitate the Fairgrounds Stadium? How do we make sure it's safer and ADA compliant, which it is not? We have underinvested in it and not kept it up. And then how do we bring new technologies to bring the sound down? I am sympathetic and live close by, and I can hear the racing and the noise, but I would also say that if you locate your house next to a train track, you cannot complain when the train comes. There is always going to be racing at the fairgrounds. We can make it safer, we can make it less noisy, and we can also bring to bear a creative approach to make sure that we can do it in a financially responsible way.
Thank you.
I want to get back to the topic of crime and specifically license plate readers. We know the council did recently vote to go with the LPRs after the preliminary period. Now, Metro Police say they've been a powerful tool in their fight against crime. Specifically, they say 87 stolen cars recovered, more than 110 people arrested. That was during the 6-month pilot program. Some community groups say it unfairly targets minority and low-income communities. Do you support the continued use of these LPRs in Nashville? We begin with Alice Rolli.
Great. Thank you. Oh, that's okay. I do support the police. I'm glad to have their endorsement. And I think that using technology that has been proven more than 40 years, using it responsibly, and it has been tested here. I think a lot of the criticism is around where the license plate readers were placed during this initial pilot study. They were placed where overlaying where crimes are reported, right? So how are you going to be effective at force multiplying if you don't locate license plate readers in a place where we can gather the data to do things that we know are hard? We know that stolen guns, that there is a state law that says if you steal a gun, it's a felony, and there's a 180-day mandatory minimum. We're not able to prosecute that crime of a stolen gun because frequently we don't have the evidence and the data. License plate readers help us have evidence so that we can appropriately prosecute those types of things. Secondly, I think it's a fallacy to say that they are not tested in the county. We have satellite cities here with majority white populations that have been using license plate readers. And so they're already, when we sort of take the corpus of the entire county, we have other police departments within the county that have been using these successfully, sharing that data with the Metro Police. So it is important that we're responsible of what we do with the data, but we've got to support our police, and this technology is a way that we can do that effectively.
Thank you.
Rory, thanks. The most important job of the mayor, any government, is keeping its citizens safe. This is why we've made consistent investments that I've supported all the way along in terms of increases in pay, increases in personnel, improvements in facilities, and acquisition of equipment. LPRs in particular, we've talked about a little bit already tonight. It is something that I think can be responsibly implemented in the city with additional guardrails. And what I'm looking to is make sure that we have full and fair community conversation to try to address concerns. We've had multiple concerns raised. I think there is a pathway to implementing this at a scale that allows it to be useful from a crime prevention standpoint and a crime resolution standpoint. But if you look at the data so far, the number of hits that have been related to crimes, it's very difficult to distinguish those that might not have otherwise been captured from those that would have been, and it's actually a relatively small number from the total number of footage that's been captured overall. So it is still an extremely broad net of surveillance at a surveillance state level, and I think that's the part that deserves additional scrutiny. It's not that the technology is bad, and it's not bad that the police want to use it. I think the way we conducted the conversation on a citywide basis still needs some attention, but as mayor, we know the program is going forward, and I expect to work with Chief Drake to implement it responsibly.
Thank you both.
Let's talk about budgets for a few minutes. If you had been mayor this year, how would your proposed budget have been different from the one submitted by Mayor Cooper? Freddie O'Connell.
Yeah, the good news here is you can see a lot of the improvements in the budget that the council passed because I worked directly on them. I worked with our Chair of Budget and Finance, Kevin Roten, to ensure that not only would we have increased transit access to offer additional crosstown capacity, we would also be able to initiate community-based service out to Bellevue, where the James Lawson High School is. We worked to make sure that there was school safety funding in there. We worked to make sure there was funding for the arts in that budget above and beyond what the mayor recommended. We generally worked across the board to address priorities in the budget, including additional cost of living adjustments for Metro employees, who are some of the hardest working people in the city. And it is one of the best hedges we have against increases in cost of living, is paying our public employees appropriately. So a lot of the things that I wanted to see in this budget, I went ahead and fought for because it was the budget that I wanted to take over and inherit starting in October when I'm sworn into the mayor's office. A lot of these priorities will continue over the next 4 years. It is really a focus on safety in schools, where we need to maintain progress that we've made. We saw incredible progress out of our schools today. Our teachers are the highest paid in the state of Tennessee as a result of recent budget decisions that I've been a proud supporter of. We will also make significant advancements in transit and infrastructure, and we'll restore the delivery of core city services, trash pickup and potholes chief among them. So I look forward to inheriting the budget that I already worked very hard on.
Thank you. Alice Rolli?
Yeah, I would like to see greater accountability in our budget and our budgeting process. One of the chief goals of the mayor and the chief charges of the mayor is to set performance and accountability frameworks for every one of your tax dollars. I think Nashville citizens get frustrated when we see that we have a homeless challenge and we've purchased all of these pods that are sitting off not used. Nashville citizens get frustrated when we see contracts for equipment going to schools that stay in closets. These are things that don't make sense and that I think start to frustrate our citizens when we come back and say we need to raise your taxes more when we aren't necessarily managing the dollars that we have well. So what I would like to see in my next budget is a very clear sense of how our number one spending priority should be education in schools. It is today, but we need to direct the majority of our dollars to the school sites and to the academic outcomes for kids. Right now, only about 3/4 of our dollar, or only about $340 million of our school budget goes to actually pay regular teachers who are teaching in our schools, meaning we pay more for our debt than we do for the salaries of our teachers. We need to reverse that. We need more individuals in our schools to be paid that are in a role of instruction of our kids. That is a very simple framework, but it is one that the best urban school systems have followed to achieve better results.
Yes, Freddie O'Connell.
Great. I'll quickly note that most of the things Alice mentioned just now were purchased with the result of one-time federal funds, and in fact, many of us on Metro Council did call for accountability, but they weren't actually in our budget process.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of, Metro, we know, received hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government during the pandemic. We used it to help the homeless, improve infrastructure, create more affordable housing in some cases. Those were one-time funds. As mayor, how do you plan to continue these programs, especially those for the homeless, once the federal funds are gone? Begin with Alice Rolli.
Well, I find it interesting that there is less accountability for some reason if it's federal tax dollars or state tax dollars than it's local. These are all our tax dollars. And so if we are not asking questions, if we are not putting in accountability frameworks, if we are not building in clawback agreements with vendors who are not performing as needed, then we are not managing all of the tax dollars that we have. So part of effectively running the city is taking responsibility for every dollar, not saying that those are federal dollars, therefore I don't need to ask questions, they're one-time dollars, they don't matter. We could have used dollars, federal dollars, to supplement, not supplant other spending priorities. We could have banked more of our local tax dollars and beefed up further our rainy day funds. If we didn't know how to spend those dollars, if we didn't know how to be accountable for them, we shouldn't have made those decisions that we did. Just because it's one time doesn't mean that you can abdicate responsibility for how those dollars are spent, how they are managed, and how the city treats taxpayer money, wherever it comes from. So in terms of asking the question of what we will continue, I think we've got to see what results we've gotten. what still makes sense, what things we no longer need because we are not in a pandemic situation anymore. And then we've got to reset to make sure that we are funding our public safety, funding our schools, and funding our infrastructure. And then if there are other programs we need to be looking at to continue, we should ask questions of what the results were.
Okay. Freddie O'Connell.
Well, the good news is we actually used most of the one-time federal money for important things. In fact, Mayor Cooper is deservedly proud of our having invested more of our one-time federal money in creation of affordable housing than any other city. That is one-time federal money, but there are still opportunities ahead to make sure we continue some of those investments. Some we're going to have to do, and this was part of the issue. We did have a couple of oversight committees, and we had to look at all those recommendations very carefully, and we had to comply with the federal requirements that were on the table. In many of those cases, we did one-time startup costs. I'm especially proud of having ensured that our 4 historically black colleges and universities took advantage of startup costs to ensure that their faculty, staff, and students will soon be able to participate in We Go Ride, which means their university ID pays the fare. Major institutions can do this all over the city, where the institution pays a bulk rate and their employees or faculty, staff, and students get to take transit. This is a generational opportunity to both increase access around our economic generators of the HBCUs, and it's a great use of one-time federal money. We also will have, going forward, the opportunity to use more of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act, and it is those regional partnerships, the state and federal partnerships, and the awareness of how to use these dollars effectively for Nashvillians that will help us offset what we're paying as ratepayers and taxpayers in Nashville.
Thank you both.
Thank you. For the second consecutive year, Metro Nashville Public Schools has attained a level 5 value-added growth score from the Tennessee Value-Added Assessment System. It was just announced today. Are you satisfied with the results of MNPS, and how can you continue to support the development? Let's start with Freddie O'Connell.
Sure. So our daughters are both in our public schools. We are entrusting our public school system with their futures, and so far they are thriving. This is good news, but we can always work toward stronger accountability and higher expectations. For instance, we know that after the aftermath of COVID, we saw a lot of families leave metro schools over frustrations with policies related to distance learning. We know that we could have probably seen a stronger element of participation in Promising Scholars, which is a learning loss recovery program that was available. In our middle school, we had actually more students who qualified to be National Merit Junior semifinalists than actually wound up participating in the program. To me, that's a great example of how we can systematically increase expectations across the board. That state measure, the Tennessee Value-Added Assessment System, the TVAS Level 5, it is incredible to have earned that distinction 2 years in a row. It does mean we're seeing growth. We've seen our best ELA performance ever, to my understanding, from metro schools. These are great things and they should be celebrated, but I also want to keep our expectations higher so that our daughter and her peers, as they reach into levels where they're going to start considering careers and applying for internships, that we don't miss opportunities to demonstrate the excellence that exists. But right now, teacher pay, recruitment and retention, all of these things added up together are showing that we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Alice Rolli.
I am worried about the direction that our schools are going in, and while we are seeing growth, we are still 94th or 95th out of all of the state's 95 counties in our overall results for kids and families here. We need an education mayor, one who, Carl Dean was the last one. 10 years ago, 40% of our kids were reading on grade level. We are not getting the results now today, and I think some of that is the lack of support and leadership from the mayor's office to remind ourselves and to be critical friends when we are falling short for education for our school kids. I want parents in our county to have the same choice that Freddie's children have. Freddie's children are zoned for a school that he does not send his children to. He sends them to a different school. And yet, for some reason, we believe that parent voices, when parents are voting with their feet, when there are waiting lists at certain schools and other schools are failing, we continue to tell certain communities in Nashville that their kids, if they can't provide their own transportation, need to stay at a school. And we have 19 schools today in the bottom 5% of our state, and 11 of them have been there since 2015. We have proposed that if your child is zoned to one of those schools and you're not able, like Freddie is, to drive your kids to a successful school, that we will provide that transportation assistance option so that you and your family can go to a publicly funded school within our county so that we can keep you here and we can make sure that your child is successful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Freddie?
I will say I think it's completely reasonable to be able to choose within public schools, and I think it's a little bit unusual to have another candidate try to determine what's appropriate for my family.
Okay. Right?
Yeah, I would only say it is exercising school choice, and many of the defenders of the status quo do not want families to have a choice of where to send their child to school, and many of those same defenders of the status quo elect to send their child to a more successful school, and it's the hypocrisy there that is bothersome to me.
Be happy to invite you back into our public school system.
All right, well, we are, so we are out of time for the questions now, actually. This has been pretty exciting here. But we want to give each candidate one last opportunity to make their case on why they're the best choice to be Nashville's next mayor. You have 90 seconds. Freddie O'Connell.
Great. Thanks, David, Rory. Thank you to Belmont University. Thank you to all of you here in the live audience, and of course, thanks to everybody at home. My name is Freddie O'Connell. I grew up here. My parents are still in the home I grew up in West Nashville. My mother was a 40-year career teacher. My dad was a federal employee who retired as a Ranger in the U.S. Army Corps and is also a songwriter who had one of Johnny Cash's last cuts ever. Music City is in our blood. Our family has lived in the Salemtown neighborhood for the past 16 years in North Nashville. Our two daughters do attend our public schools where they are thriving, and we want everyone to have that opportunity. I've been for 20 years a neighborhood leader, a nonprofit leader, transit and advocacy leader, and I've been a software and technology professional. I love Nashville, and that's why I've worked so long on ensuring that we have the tools to build a better future. For me, that doesn't mean investing in a team that has connections to shadowy right-wing groups. It doesn't mean taking radical anti-tax pledges. It means looking toward the future in a way that shows consensus. It means that it's the kind of thing that demonstrates how we come together with endorsements from multiple of our former candidates in this race, Matt Wiltshire, Jim Gingrich, Senator Jeff Yarbrough, Senator Heidi Campbell. Just today, the entire school board endorsed this campaign, along with Sheriff Darren Hall. We think we've got a great opportunity to build a Nashville for Nashvillians. You can learn more at readyforfreddie.com. I'd love to earn your vote on September 14th.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us tonight here live, and then also to our viewers at home. This is an important election. Tomorrow we begin casting votes to determine our city's 10th mayor. 3 times in a row in the last 8 years, we've moved a desk from the city council to the mayor's office. And in that time, things have seemed to have gone downhill. Our crime is up, our tax rate per capita is 70% higher, and our schools are declining both in their results and in the number of families choosing our public schools. If you are worried about the direction of our city, if you are worried about special interests of all of the downtown crowds, of webs of relationships that stop making sense to you, a viewer, to voters, I'd ask you to look at our campaign. We are not in any way beholden to anyone but our citizens who live here. Our citizens who want someone to come when you call 911. Our citizens who want to send their children to a school that their tax dollars pay for. And our citizens who are tired of pointing fingers between different levels of government, tired of not taking responsibility, and our citizens who are ready for results. I am a Nashville native. I'm a former school teacher and a business executive, and I'd have the opportunity to serve you as our city's 10th mayor. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you. Want to thank David Plazist and thank Belmont University. Early voting starts tomorrow and the election is September 14th. We hope you have a good night, everybody. So long.